Shalom. This week we are reading Parshat VAYERA, beginning in Genesis chapter 18. And the Parsha provides us with many beautiful insights into the personality and the career and the dynamic attributes of our forefather Abraham. And indeed, in this one particular Parsha, we find the announcement, the prophecy of the birth of Yitzchak, and the Parsha ends with the crescendo of Abraham's 10th and final test, the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. So there are many things, many opportunities that we have to learn, many examples, many elements in the vast portrait of the life of Abraham are included in this Parsha, Parshat VAYERA. And in past years, we've explored a number of different themes from this Parsha. We've talked about the aspect of hospitality, Abraham's tent that was open from all four sides. We've talked about the miraculous nature of the birth and the existence of Yitzchak and what that means for the Jewish people. We've talked about aspects of the Akedah. And I'd like to talk now about something really extraordinary and difficult to understand, one of the major events in Parshat VAYERA, and that is Hashem's destruction of the wicked cities of the plain. 5 cities altogether, most famously Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Amorah, and the unique intervention of Avraham Avinu, Abraham's need to pray for these people, his extremely high-profile, very, very hands-on approach and attempt to dissuade Hashem's decree of destruction. The more that we understand about Avraham and who he was, and his very unique relationship to the world and to Hashem, the more that we can understand why he was so motivated from such a pure place, obviously, to try and step in and save the people of Sodom. But the more that we learn about how wicked that place was and how horribly inhuman and absolutely despicable their ways were and how corrupt and evil the whole deal was, what was going on over there, then the more we are perplexed and totally confounded as to why Avraham even did this, or even thought it worthwhile. So we have a bit of a conundrum, I think, in trying to understand the message, the nature of Avraham's intervention for the wicked cities, the people there, his hope that there would be enough righteous men in those cities to protect with their merits everyone else in the cities. So we can begin our question with the verse that we read, "And Hashem said, shall I conceal from Avraham what I do, now that Avraham is surely to become a great and mighty nation, and all of the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him? For I have loved him, because he commands his children and his household after him, that they keep the ways of Hashem, doing charity and justice, in order that Hashem might bring them upon Abraham that which he had spoken to him." So this verse is a key to understanding the mystery of this whole concept, Abraham's relationship in prayer, his prayer relationship with these wicked cities. What is going on in these verses? I don't understand. Hashem said, shall I conceal from Avraham what I do? What exactly did I think? Why would I have a notion, why would it occur to me that it isn't okay for Hashem to conceal something from Avraham? The Torah is telling me here, Hashem is saying, shall I conceal then from Avraham what I do? How could I do that now that Avraham is surely to become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by him, for I have loved him, because he commands his children and his household after him that they keep the way of Hashem, doing charity and justice. So, my question when confronting this verse would be, well, does Hashem owe Avraham some sort of explanation? Does he have some sort of contractual obligation with Avraham to tell him what's going to go down? Yes, exactly. That's what the Torah is telling us here, because this is really, first and foremost, a continuation of a theme that we began to discuss, that Avraham is the guarantor. Avraham is the antithesis of all of the unraveling of human dignity, as we'll soon see. Everything that was happening in those wicked cities and everything that they represented. Avraham is the opposite. Abraham's life is a life of charity and justice, doing the way of Hashem. That's the legacy that he gave over to his children and to his household. And so Hashem is essentially saying, because Avraham is the guarantor, and he is my fail-safe, my default, to make sure that humanity stays focused on my ways. And now that I have isolated this particular cancerous spot that has to be excised, it's only right, the verse seems to be telling us, that I don't conceal this from Avraham, because he is really the foreman. He is the executor now of the human race. I think one of the best ways to understand this is with a beautiful midrash that our sages kind of give an example of what this is all about. This confession of Hashem's, this admission that Hashem feels he owes an explanation to Avraham. Midrash tells us, Hashem is saying essentially, I'm going to be doing such a huge thing in my world. Shall I not tell Avraham my love? He is so beloved before me, he is going to raise up this great nation, Israel, and I'm going to bequeath to him this land. How can I uproot 5 cities from the land that will be his without his foreknowledge? So the Midrash explains the parable here can be likened to a king who had an orchard. And he went and he gave this orchard to his dear friend as a gift. After some days, he needed to cut down some trees from that orchard for some beams that he wanted. The king wanted to come back and take something back from that orchard. So the king said to himself, even though I'm the king, and it's still mine, and I gave him something that's mine, it's only right that now that it's his orchard, I consult with him before I go and take it. And so too, says the Midrash, the Holy One, blessed be he, since he sought to destroy 5 of these cities that really fell in the purview of Avraham in the promised land that was to be bequeathed to Avraham, and also because of Avraham's relationship to humanity and his responsibility, he said, it's not right that I destroy them without Avraham's knowledge. So, I think what we really need to understand is what was going on in Sodom and Amorah, these wicked cities of the plain. Was it so bad? After so many gyrations of humanity, after so many turns around, after the flood and that whole disaster, and Hashem's promise that he would never again destroy the entire world at once by water, because he understood what man was. And then shortly after that, the generation of the dispersion, again, men conspiring, duplicit, manipulative. Now we have, again, a pocket of humanity that seems to have totally lost it. And all the while, again, Avraham, seen in that light of the guarantor, the one who is to bring the way of justice and truth and charity into the world. So, in verse 20, we find, and Hashem said, because the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, and because their sin has been very grave, I will descend and see if indeed they are acting in accordance with its outcry, which has come to me, then I will bring destruction. And if not, I will know. So what is this crying all about, this crying that the verses tell us there arose such a tremendous cry from the cities before Hashem? Was it the general populace that was crying? Whose crying is alluded to here? What was really happening? So we have an amazing and gripping, chilling description in the words of our sages, passed down in the oral tradition as to really what was going on behind the scenes. And first of all, we learn that these cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities, they were blessed beyond measure. They had incredible wealth. Gold and precious gems could be easily extracted from the earth. The land was so fertile and it was so beautifully watered. And the trees were so lush and so tall like nowhere else in the world. And the fields and the vegetation, it just was so beautiful. And there was everything that could be wanted or obtained in the world. Such beauty, such physical bounty and blessing. And indeed, remember that a while ago, back in chapter 13 of the book of Genesis, we read this verse. We read in verse 10 of chapter 13, so Lot raised his eyes and saw the entire plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before Hashem destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Hashem, like the land of Egypt going towards Zoar. And the Torah prophetically, before the destruction, because there is not necessarily chronological order, told us back in chapter 13, the description of this area was it was the garden of Hashem. So this was incredibly blessed. And it was just so beautiful. Now, prosperity can have two effects. Prosperity can be something that keeps a person in check, in balance, that constantly reminds us of God's blessings in our lives, and that constantly inspires us towards goodness, towards wanting to be close to Hashem, towards appreciation, which is the foundation of human existence. Acknowledgement and appreciation of God. But the downside is that prosperity can also become the unraveling of a person, and prosperity can drive a wedge between a person and the Almighty, and it can lead a person to haughtiness and to conceit and to forgetting well nigh indeed that a person was even created in the divine image. And so the sages tell us that what happened in the case of the people of Sodom was that they looked around, saw this incredible bounty, and said that since we have such a beautiful blessing in our land, and food is so abundant, silver and gold can be easily extracted from the ground, beautiful gems, beautiful water, we have everything we need. Why put up with the nuisance of travelers? They said, we have to shut down the borders and forget all about the whole, what's called, in this midrash, it's quite beautiful, it's called Torat Orchim, meaning the Torah, the lessons of hospitality. Let's strike it from our town records. We don't have enough to share, and we don't want strangers coming by. We don't want any strangers to intrude, because we don't want to share anything. We don't want them to diminish our supplies. And so they actually made a rule, made a number of rules, made a whole charter regarding how guests should be treated. One thing led to another, and these people actually just fell apart altogether in terms of every aspect of humanity, of dignity, of caring about anyone. They became so evil. They became really the human image just reflected in a negative image. The verse tells us in Genesis 13, and the people of Sodom were evil, and they sinned greatly before Hashem. Why both words? What is the difference between evil and sinning? And our sages tell us they were evil to each other, and they sinned greatly before Hashem in terms of sexual immorality, idolatry, and murder. And those, of course, are the big three, which are symptomatic of the total destruction of humanity. But here, murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry became the law of the land, and one who was not willing to uphold these as sacred principles was one to be tortured and killed. And so the Midrash gives us chilling examples, and some of them I can't even read to you, of what went on in this place. Oh, there's a famous example of one of the daughters of Lot himself, who married one of the aristocracy of Sodom. She married into one of the important families. And she saw a poor man just kind of shambling and rolling around in the gutters. He had nothing. And she took pity on him. And so she, when she would go out with a large pitcher on her shoulder every day to draw water, in the pitcher she concealed bread, because you see it was a crime to feed the homeless in Sodom. It was a crime to encourage wayfarers. So she felt terrible when she saw this person suffering, so she concealed bread, brought it to him every day in this pitcher that was for drawing water. And people in the town began to suspect that something was up, because they said to each other, this poor man, why hasn't he died yet? Why is he still here? What's keeping him going? He doesn't have anything. We made sure of that. And finally they began to suspect, and they formed a committee, some sort of commission. And they looked into it, and they discovered the truth, and they took her out, and they burned her to death. And she cried out, God, King of the universe, do justice and judge me, judge between me and the people of Sodom. And her cry arose before the throne of glory. And there are other examples. And when this verse tells us that Hashem descended to see if things are as bad as the cry that arises before me, it's referring to the cry of these righteous individuals who died for the sake of the very charity and justice that Abraham stands for, the very charity and justice that had been outlawed in this city. And so there are more examples that are given in the Midrashim about how corrupt the judicial system was, how the judicial system was actually united and bent on the total cynical manipulation and subjugation of the populace, so that they found ways of authorizing mass robbery and stealing from the populace. All sorts of stories are given about taxes that were levied on people who had to pass by the environs of the city. And when they didn't pay it, they were brutalized and beaten until blood flowed. And then when they were brought before the justices would say, well, you have to pay them for the fact that they did an operation on you of bloodletting, which is very healthy. They aired out your blood a little bit, so now you have to pay them for that service that they rendered to you. Horrible, horrible things, one after the other examples. And even on the local level, forget about wayfarers. There were two local girls, who lived in Sodom. And they used to go every day to draw water from the well. And eventually one said to the other, you look terrible. What's wrong? And she said, we have no more food in our home. And I'm really rapidly approaching death. And so she took pity on her friend, and she too filled up her pitcher with flour. And they switched the pitchers. And when the men of Sodom realized what was going on, they took her as well and judged her and burnt her to death. And her cry too arose before Hashem. So, of course, there's the famous example that everybody knows about the Midrash that tells us that when a wayfarer would come to Sodom, they had a special bed, special size bed for visitors, and it was only one size. And if a person was too tall for that bed, they would cut off his legs so that he fit. And if a person was too short and didn't fit perfectly, they would stretch him until he fit. So they only were willing to accept someone that was completely on their terms. Obviously, the Midrash is telling us. But when we learn of the way in which people were treated, wayfarers, those who lived there, the utter contempt for human life, the united effort to snuff out the breath of life wherever possible. What we begin to understand regarding this cry that arose, what we begin to understand about Hashem's decision to destroy the wicked cities, we begin to understand that they came to a point where they lived evil for its own sake. What other explanation is there? How do we define a society that actually cherishes a behavior that will lead to more and more death and decay? How do we explain the formation of a society that cherishes all of the crimes and all of the heinous undoings of the divine image that will actually lead to a horrific end for humanity? Murder and immorality and the perversion of justice, these things became enshrined in Sodom and Gomorrah and the wicked cities. They became enshrined as the law of the land, and they were to die for. And they were to die for with self-sacrifice, and any person who deviated whatsoever from the sacred rules of selfishness, greed, showing no pity, that person was to be ostracized and killed. All of this makes the conundrum of Abraham's involvement with these people in prayer even more perplexing. Again, we understand from the outset Hashem's relationship with Abraham was such that Hashem felt Abraham, being the one who will ensure that humanity retains its dignity, the one who is to bequeath charity and justice and my ways to the land, the one whom, through his children, through Israel, that will live according to my ways, all humanity will be blessed. And this taking place in the land that I bequeath to him, I owe him an explanation. But it's harder for us to understand Abraham, the man of God, the friend of God, whose whole life, by the way, and this is so ironic to reflect upon, Abraham, everything that we know about him, what is stressed in the words of our sages, and what we see clearly from the allusions in Parshat VAYERA, his tent, open on four sides, his pain at not having wayfarers to feed on the third day after his circumcision being greater than the pain he actually had from the operation. Abraham's life was the very opposite of these people in every way. He stood for hospitality. He stood for total selflessness. He stood for doing everything possible for another person. And yet Abraham was so tremendously moved and so tremendously disquieted by Hashem's plan that he found it an obligation and a responsibility to pray for these people. I want to understand with you, what was he doing? Was he specifically praying only for the righteous? Was he praying for everyone? He understood that there is a concept that if there would be enough righteous, that Hashem would spare everyone in their merits. He stopped at 10 and went his way, and the conversation ended because he learned from the history of the flood, when there were 8 righteous people in the world, Noach and his family with him, that was not enough to save the world, it was only enough to save themselves, in that case of Hashem's decree, he understood that less than 10 he can't pray for. When he saw that there were not 10, he stopped. But who was he praying for? Even if we understand the simple meaning that he actually was praying in the merit of the righteous men for the whole town, still, how could he have even thought that there would be 10 righteous men there? He certainly was aware of the extent of the moral decay and the terrible situation and the extent of what to which things had totally fallen in these places. So after we examine the entire situation and understand that the far-reaching, consequential, earth-shattering ideas that are being shared with us, the conclusion that we can come to is very profound and yet very simple. And that is that this is who Avraham was, that he never gave up hope on anyone. This is the entire lesson that's being emphasized to us. Why did he bother praying for people who were so totally wicked in every way? There isn't even a word to describe the horrific, monstrous, perverted, twisted image that they portrayed. But yet Avraham prayed for their rescue because it was something that he could not possibly do to give up on another person. And this is part of his legacy. This is part of the blessing that he brings to the world through his children Israel. This is part of teaching Hashem's ways and charity and justice. And that is that Avraham knew that we cannot ever give up on humanity. This is what he taught his household. And this really is the source of the phenomena that we find that Jews are always at the forefront of searing social issues. They are always involved in civil rights, in equal rights, in movements of social justice. This is learned from Abraham's involvement with the people of Sodom, who themselves certainly didn't have a lot going for them, didn't have a lot of redeeming social value to speak of. And yet Abraham, his very nature was not to give up, was to do as much as possible to contribute to the progress and the betterment of human society altogether. How? Through the legacy of teaching the ways of Hashem, charity and justice. And that's where this propensity for involvement in social change for the Jewish people comes from. But we need to remember the exact way of our father Avraham, who prayed so fervently for the rescue of such wicked people, that Avraham's career, his dedication, his mission and campaign in this world was to teach the world that there is a God and to teach the world their way. And that is the purpose of his prayer. That is the purpose of his legacy. So to be focused on the betterment of human society, to be focused on movements for social change is all well and good, and apparently in some context a Jewish tradition. But towards what end? Today there are societies that imitate and mirror to some extent the morals and values that were espoused and enshrined in those wicked cities. Are these things that we should be campaigning for? Is this a type of equality or justice or a social equality that we should be aspiring towards? Abraham's goal in praying for the people of Sodom was predicated on his belief that it's not possible, that we must not ever abandon our hope in the dignity of mankind, in the divine spark within a person, that we must not, cannot, should not, will not ever give up hope on a human being, but the secret to ensuring the survival, he knew, of the human race and the mission which God gave him was to ensure this through teaching the whole world that the only real reality is the reality of the one true living God.